Let's get practical now and have a look at how to use RStudio to analyze text that we'll download from GRETIL. Let's begin by looking at how to import text and clean text. In order to follow along, you will need to install R, and you will also need to install RStudio. When you've done that, then let me just begin by saying that this meme holds some profound truths. If at any point you struggle to follow along, if some analysis just won't work or something won't install, then just try typing the error messages that you get into Google, or type in how to do this particular thing in R, and chances are that you will find hundreds of other people exchanging information with these other on websites such as Stack Overflow, trying to provide solutions to the very thing that you are struggling with. There's no shame in asking the internet for help in this way. This is actually how real programmers get anything done, really. But beyond Google, let me just point you to two particularly great books, specifically R for Data Science, which is arguably the best introduction to the current dominant paradigm when it comes to using R for data science, the so-called tidyverse approach. And then also Text Mining with R, which is a very, very approachable introduction to using R to do textual analysis, which has an approach that is sort of goes hand in hand with what's in R for data science. These two books are both amazing, and you can read both of them online for free on the links that you see here. Without further ado, let's just jump into the fun part. Let's begin by opening up a web browser. I'm going to use Safari here, and then let's go to one of my GitHub repositories. So if we're going to go to github.com/ULYNGS, that's my user account, and then /OCHS_text_mining. And that will take you to this repository that has some files that I've put together for this these videos. So we are going to click the green clone or download button here, and then click download zip. Let's go to download this as a folder on your computer. You can put that wherever you want. I am just going to leave it in the downloads folder here, and then I'm going to open it up. So the first thing we're going to do is to just think ahead in terms of how we're going to keep things nice and organized. So we're going to create two subfolders here. I'm going to make a subfolder that I'll call data_raw, and you should do the same thing. And then we're going to create another subfolder that we'll call data_processed. So in a second, we'll download a couple of texts from GRETIL, and we're going to put those in the data_raw folder. And then when we do some processing of those texts, then the results we're going to store into data_processed. And it's really best practice to keep these things separate, because we don't really want to fiddle around with our raw data. We want to leave that untouched, and then we want to sort of store our processed versions elsewhere. So now we are going to go to GRETIL. So I'm going to pretend that I've never been there before, and I'm gonna just Google GRETIL Sanskrit, and you'll probably get the Göttingen Register of Electronic Text in Indian Languages as the first result here. We are going to now download 3 texts from GRETIL. We're going to download the Rig Veda. So click Veda over here, and then Samhita. And then you'll see a few different versions up here. We're going to click this guy, plain_transformation, that I think is easiest to work with. Then we are also going to download, I think, the Mahabharata. So let's click Epics over here, and then let's click Mahabharata. And again, we'll see a bunch of different versions here. So here you see something where it's split up into 18 different parts. We're going to click this guy, Mahabharata 1-18, that just has everything in one file. And then finally, we're also going to download the Ramayana. So let's click Ramayana here. And then let's click, let's choose this plain transformation as well. Because again, I think that's easy, that format is easy to work with. Okay, so now we can close our internet browser here. And let's just put the files that we just downloaded into the data_raw folder here. So I'm just gonna do that in a very manual fashion here. I hope I don't have embarrassing things in my downloads folder. There we go. Now we're going to open up RStudio, and we're going to do that by opening up this RStudio project file here. And that is going to open RStudio with this folder set as the working directory. If you've never seen RStudio before, congratulations, welcome to RStudio. RStudio is a so-called IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment, and that means that it's like a Swiss Army knife that just has the different tools that you frequently want to use when you're doing data analysis and programming in one sort of convenient program. So you'll see up here, we've got something that will tell us about what variables we'll be creating as we go along. Down here, we can see the files in the current working directory. Over here, we can type in some commands into R. And if we click, let's open this import and clean demo file here. Then that file is going to be opened up here, where we can see and edit files. So let's begin by just clicking this button here to make this full height. And I'm also just going to drag this all the way to the right here so that I don't get distracted. If you've never seen an R Markdown document before, congratulations as well. This is an R Markdown document. I'll say a bit more in the final video about what those can do. But for now, let's just note that there is some sort of metadata about the document up here in the top. Then we see stuff like this. This is a chunk of code. These little things here that begin with 3 backticks and end with 3 backticks, where we can run some commands in R and other programming languages to do the actual analysis that we want. And then we see other stuff like this, which is actually just like normal text written in a very simple syntax called Markdown, where, for example, a hash means a header and so on. And we use this to write human readable texts so that we can explain to ourselves what we're doing as we go along, sort of in an interactive notebook format, so that in the future when we come back, it will be easy for us to understand what our past selves were up to, because we will hopefully have been writing some understandable explanations. Again, we'll go into this in more detail in the final video, where we'll see how we can use R Markdown to write our entire papers and so on if we want to. Good. So for now, this document just has some notes to me about what we're going to do now. So we are going to look at how to import text first, but the first thing we'll do is actually just to run this chunk of code, because that is going to read in these packages that we're going to use some functions from when we do. In fact, actually, we're not going to use the duplicate package. So let me just remove that. Let's click this green button over here. That's just going to run this chunk, and now we will have the functions from the packages in the tidyverse collection of packages available to us. If you've never used RStudio or R before, you'll probably also receive a prompt up here to install the tidyverse packages. If you don't get that, and if this doesn't work, you can also just type install.packages and then tidyverse like this and run that. In my case, I'm not going to do that, but that will install this package for you as well. Okay, so let's get started. Let's try importing the Mahabharata text and clean that, and then let's try saving that out. I've actually done this in advance in one of the other files that we'll look at in a second, that has solved this for all of the texts and read them all in and combines them. But let's just look at how to do this with Mahabharata first, and then we can use the other file afterwards. So I'm going to use this function that's called read_lines, which, as you might have guessed, will be able to read in a text line by line. So we are going to read in the text that's in the data_raw folder, and then it's called mbh1 and so on. in fact, if I click my tab here, then I'm going to get auto completion. So I'm going to read in this file, which is the Mahabharata thing. If I do this, this is going to look very, very messy, because it's actually going to read it in and then print out the results. And it's going to print out as many lines as it's been told to do by default. So here we can see that it's printed out the first 1,000 lines from this Mahabharata document. So we can see that if you've never seen an HTML file in its raw version before, where this is what the computer sees when it sees an HTML file. So we have this information here at the top that's sort of like meta information about the text, and then here about line 82, the actual text itself begins. Instead of just having it like this, which is in the terminology of R, this is a character vector where each of the elements is a line of text. We are just going to put it into a so-called tibble, which is like it's like a spreadsheet with rows and columns. You can think of it as that. So I'm just going to insert this weird little symbol here that is just a so-called pipe, which simply means then do this. So you get that by writing percent greater than percent. And then I'm going to write as underscore tibble, which is going to, after we read the lines in, it's going to put in a tibble, and we see the output right here. So now we have a single column here that's called value that contains elements that are characters. And then we've got almost 225,000 rows. So we've got almost 225,000 lines of text. This is a massive text Mahabharata. And actually, let's just change the name of this column from value to, let's call it raw text. Raw text, yes. So we're going to do that by writing rename here. And then I'll write raw text. And that's going to be the value column. There we go. Very good. So we can assign this. We can store the result of this in a new variable. So let's write mahabara. I have no idea how to spell mahabara. Maybe it's like this. Let's call this mahabharata underscore raw. And then we're gonna write this little arrow here, which means take this and then assign it to a variable that's called this. So if I run this, then you'll see that we get nothing printed to the screen. If I just write Mahabharata raw now here and run that line by pressing Command Enter, then we see the output put here. Great. Okay, so that is the first step. So now we've read in, congratulations. Now we've imported this text into R. The second thing that we will do before we finish this video is to then do some cleaning of this text so that we have a version of the text that we actually want to work with. So one thing that we will see, I'm just going to write view, and that's going to open up sort of this sort of scrollable view of it, and we can see that we've got all of this information here at the top that we don't really care about. We only, for our current purpose, care about the lines or the rows here from row 82 onwards. So I'm going to dramatically write slice here, which is going to cut up this table, and I'm going to take from row 82 to, I'm going to write n here, parentheses. That just means 82 to whatever the total number of rows is. So if I run this, I get only from row 82 until the end. There might also be something at the end that we want to exclude. I'm just going to write tail here, the Mahabharata raw. Is going to show me the 6 final rows. So you'll see that actually the information we care about also ends here. So the last 4 rows, we actually don't care about them either. So I'm just going to write a parenthesis around n here and then write -4 like this. And that is going to exclude the last 4 rows. Great, so now we actually only have the text of Mahabharata. So let's again just store the result of this in a new variable that I'm going to call Mahabharata text, like that. Great, so the next step that I've noted to myself here is that I'm just going to insert a new code chunk here. If we take a look at each of these lines, we see that so let's ignore these odd characters that, so this actually means a tab. This is how you write a tab character in sort of computer language. This BR here means a break tag, which means like, insert make a line break in HTML. But never mind about those for now. What we see here is that we actually have each line begin with some information about probably like the chapter and the verse and the line of Mahabharata. We might want to preserve that information. So why don't we create a new column? So I'm just going to write mutate here, which means create a new column or change a current column, and we're going to make a new column that we'll call, let's call that verse underscore line, for example. If I just write test here, then you'll see that we get actually let me just take this all the way to the right here. Then you see that we get an additional column that's just called test. That's not particularly helpful, but we'll change that in a second. Actually, I'm just gonna look at 5 of the lines at a time, so I don't have to deal with 225,000 rows. So let's try to do something that's more helpful now. We want this column to be something that's extracted from the raw text column. So I'm going to write string underscore extract, or stir underscore extract, and then from the raw text thing I'm going to write what am I going to do? So I am going to write so this will require us to know a little bit about something called regular expressions. So for example, in a regular expression, if I write this, then that means it's going to extract a digit, and you see now I get the first digit that it hits. If I write a plus after, it means that it's going to give me one or more before it hits something else. So you see that now it shows me what it finds until it hits a comma here. I want to do something else. I'm going to make some square brackets here, and then I'm going to write this make a little hat, and then we're going to write this tab character. So now I get a 0 again. What this means is that it's going to look for whatever it can find unless it is a tab character. And I'm going to write a plus here, which means that it's going to give me one or more until it hits a tab character, and you see that does the right thing. So now it gives us whatever we see here until it hits a tab character. Great. So now we got that verse line information. That is great. So now I have a note here that we also want to clean text. Actually, I'm going to do that in the same go. And clean text. Okay, so now we just want to change this raw text into a cleaned version. So I'm going to write mutate again. And here for starters, let's just play around with the raw text column itself. So I'm going to change the raw text column to be string replace. So I'm going to replace something inside the raw text column. And what am I going to do? Well, I could start by saying that this stuff here that we just extracted before, let's replace that with nothing. So now you see that is gone. Very good. Okay, so I could do all of this in the same mutate call, but to make things transparent, I'm just going to do it here in separate mutate calls. So I'm going to write a mutate raw text. Now we're just going to replace string replace the raw text here. We're going to replace what are we going to do? We are going to replace this tab character here as well with nothing. Okay, so far so good. I'm just going to copy that, and then I'm going to replace this BR stuff with nothing. Great, so this looks about right. So let me delete this line so we can look at everything. This will be there we go. So this looks pretty good to me. So obviously I would want to do all sorts of checks to see whether this has actually done what I want. But it seems that this works well for all of the lines. Hallelujah! We now have our clean text. It's probably confusing that we call that raw text. We could we could rename that now to text clean or something like that. There we go. Boom. And we could store this in a variable that we might call mahabharata cleaned. So the final thing we might want to do is that we might want to save out the result here so that we in our analysis can just read in the cleaned version without having to do the cleaning again. So I'm just going to write mahabharata cleaned here, and then I'm going to put that into the read underscore, no I'm not, I'm going to put it into the write underscore CSV function, which you guessed it, will write a so-called comma separate values file. That's a useful and very common way to store sort of data with rows and columns like this. And we are going to, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to put that in the data underscore processed folder. And let's just call this file mahabharata cleaned.csv. And just so that you can see that we're not cheating here, we haven't done this in advance. I'm just gonna look in the data underscore process folder, and you see that there's nothing. If I run this line, yes, now you see that we got the result saved out as a CSV file over here. Great. So now let's look at the pre-made version of this. Let's open this import and clean example.r, and if you scroll through that, you'll actually see that I'm doing what we just did, but reading in each of the three files line by line, then extracting the text parts from each, then extracting out the verse information and cleaning the text, and then we're actually going to combine the clean texts and save them out. So we're going to have a massive document that has the text from all three, where we also create an additional column that is called document that just tells us whether we're looking at text from Mahabharata, Ramayana, or Rig Veda. So if we click run up here and then run all, then it's going to run all of the code chunks in here, which will end up with it combining all of the texts and then saving it out. And I'm just going to write texts here, which will tell me what the final result looked like. So you'll see that in the file that we saved out here, we got a column called text that just is the raw text from the files. Then we got this verse line information. Then we got the clean text, and then we got this document column here that tells us what document we're looking at. If I write count document, it'll just count me how many rows there are with each of the entries in this column. So you can see that in the text that we've saved out now, we actually got almost 223,000 lines of text from Mahabharata, 38,000 from Ramayana, and 21,000 from the Rig Veda. So Mahabharata is massive. Great. We are going to leave it here for this video. In the next video, we're going to dive into how to do some of the actual analyses on the cleaned text.